Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to our event today. I'm Lizzie. I'm the president of the Junior Economic Club of Chicago, and I know we have a lot of other people here from the Junior Economic Club of Chicago, but also from other chapters. So if you could just type in the chat your name, your grade, and where you're from, and maybe your high school as well, that would be great. Just as a quick overview of the Junior Economic Club, we were founded in 2014 and we're an entirely student-run nonprofit. And we introduce high school students to business and economics through weekly member engagement events, quarterly economic forums, and ongoing community initiatives. So we have over 130 members from 34 schools across the city, as well as 8 other chapters across 4 countries. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Leo, who will introduce our speaker, Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you, Lizzie. So just a reminder, if you have questions throughout, you can privately chat me. So Mr. Jacobson became the vice chair of the BMO Financial Group in October of 2013, and in that role, he is responsible for driving business across all lines, including capital markets, personal and commercial banking, and wealth management. And among his other responsibilities, Mr. Jacobson is a member of the board of directors of the Bank of Montreal and serves as the chair of BMO's Political Action Committee. Prior to joining BMO, Mr. Jacobson served as the 22nd United States ambassador to Canada, holding the role from 2009 to 2013. As ambassador, he worked to expand the bilateral trading relationship between the US and Canada and raised it to the highest level between the two countries in history. He also led the efforts of the Beyond the Border Action Plan and the Regulatory Cooperation Council to improve the security and efficiency of the border between the US and Canada, and he worked to strike a balance between preserving the environment and fostering the shared values of the United States and Canada across the world. And for his efforts, Mr. Jacobson receives the State Department's 2012 Sue Cobb Award for Exemplary Diplomatic Service. So before becoming ambassador, he served in the Obama White House as special assistant to the president for presidential personnel. And before that, he was a corporate lawyer in Chicago. He is involved in a number of civic activities. He was appointed by President Obama to the Board of Trustees of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and sits on the board of several civic boards, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Archives Foundation, and the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. He received a Juris Doctor degree from Georgetown University, where he was the administrative editor of the Georgetown Law Journal, and a Bachelor of Science degree from Johns Hopkins University. And so without further ado, I'll pass it off to Mr. Jacobson to tell his story.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you for inviting me here today. Congratulations to all of the people who are taking an hour out of their time on Saturday and taking an hour out of their time to stop watching the impeachment trial. I will tell you, it's a welcome hour for me. What I thought I would do is talk for a few minutes a little bit about my background and what I've done, and you've heard some of it. And then there's a story that I want to tell about how I met Barack Obama, which I think is at least mildly relevant to you folks. And then, quite frankly, I am looking forward to your questions. As everyone always says, I'd rather talk about the things that you care about than the things that I care about. And I'll also say that the best questions that I get, and I've done lots and lots of these in television and written press and all kinds of stuff, and I get much better questions from young people than I do from anyone else. So I look forward to that part. I grew up in Chicago. Actually, I was born in the city, and we moved when I was quite young to the northern suburbs. I went to grammar school and high school out there. And as you just heard, I went to college at Johns Hopkins, where I was an economics major and political science joint degree. After that, I went to Georgetown Law School in Washington. I have always been very interested in government and in politics from a young age. I have, at various points in my life, dabbled in it in one way or another, sometimes more aggressively than others. I practiced law in Chicago at a large law firm for 30 years while I did some of those political things. After I left the practice of law, or I left practice of law because I got an offer to work for President Obama in the White House. As you heard, I was a special assistant to the president for presidential personnel, which is something you probably read about a lot these days. 12 years ago when I did this, it did the same thing that they're doing now. There are 4,000 political appointments in the federal government, people who serve at the pleasure of the president, not career civil servants, not career foreign service officers, not members of the military, but anybody the president wants to appoint. Some of them require advice and consent of the Senate. And I helped President Obama to do that. We had about 500,000 people who applied for those 4,000 jobs. So obviously it was quite discriminating. I used to tell people that the president was responsible for appointments and I was responsible for disappointments. And we disappointed a lot more people than we thrilled, but it was a great job. And anytime that you walk into the White House, I don't care how many times you've been there, if your heart does not skip a beat, there's something wrong with you. While I was in the White House, President Obama was kind enough to nominate me to be his ambassador to Canada. It was confirmed by the Senate. And I was up in Canada for 4 years, from 2009 to 2013. And I will tell you what someone told me, which is, if the president of the United States ever asks you to be the United States ambassador to Canada, or for that matter, anywhere else, say yes. These are great jobs. Anytime you can stand up in front of a group of people in a foreign country, whether it's citizens or government officials or anyone else, and begin your remarks by saying, on behalf of the president of the United States and the American people, whatever comes after that is kind of gravy. I had two fundamental responsibilities when I was the ambassador. One was to understand what was going on in Canada, understand their priorities, their needs, their wants and dislikes, and explain them back, principally in Washington, but elsewhere in the United States. And then the flip side, explaining to the Canadian government, to the Canadian people, what was going on in the United States. And that took different routes at different points in time, and happy to explain that to you. And then when I left, I got what really was kind of the perfect job for me. I am the vice chairman of the Bank of Montreal, BMO. For those of you who are in the Midwest, you're probably more familiar with the BMO Harris Bank, which is a retail bank in the United States. We're in a few other parts of the country, but we have a very broad offering, full service offering throughout the United States in capital markets and in wealth management and in all kinds of other things. And in addition to Canada, which is still where we do most of the stuff, or half of our business, we have business all over the world, in Asia, in Europe, Middle East, and elsewhere. Our U.S. headquarters is in Chicago, so it was perfect for me. I was from Chicago. I was able to come back to Chicago. I live in Chicago, and I, prior to COVID, used to spend a lot of time up in Canada, and traveling all over the world, and happy to talk to you about what I do there. But what I really wanted to do is tell you guys a story. And it's a story that there's a moral to the story. When I was a lawyer in Chicago, I had a friend who, I think, was having breakfast or lunch or something with him. And this was in, I don't know, 1999, something like that, maybe a little bit before. And he said, "Do you know Barack Obama?" And I said, "It's funny, you're like the third person who has asked me that question. And no, I don't. But, enough people ask me, I suppose I ought to try and meet him." And so he said, "Great, I'll get you his contact information." He sent me the contact information. And I called then State Senator Obama at his office where he taught at the University of Chicago Law School. And I remember it well, actually. I got his voicemail. And, "Hi, it's Barack Obama, leave a message." And I explained who had referred me and that I'd like to try to get together sometime to talk with him about what he's up to and if there was any way that we could find some common purpose. And he did not call me back, which I'll probably tell you some other Barack Obama stories to the same punchline. But anyway, he didn't call me back. And about 3 months later, I'm having lunch with the same guy. And he says, "Did you ever get a chance to connect with Barack?" And I told him the story and that he hadn't called me back. And by the time I got back to my office from lunch, there was a voicemail from Barack Obama. "I don't know what happened. The dog ate the homework. I don't know, but I'd really like to meet you." So we had lunch, and kind of one thing led to another. I helped him with his Senate campaign, and I was very involved in his presidential campaign. And then I went to Washington the day after the election to work on the transition, and then I worked for a year in the White House, and then he sent me to Canada as his ambassador. And what I oftentimes think of is there were a lot of people who met Barack Obama, and probably a lot of people who had lunch with Barack Obama at or about the same time. And probably most of them didn't have that kind of an incredible good fortune that I've had over the years. And it sort of underscores something that I believe very, very much, and that I think is really very relevant to every one of you on the call, particularly to young people. And that is that everyone has good luck, and everyone has bad luck. And in my experience, the people who are successful, or the most successful, are the people who recognize the good luck and take advantage of the good luck. And I may not be the smartest guy in the world, but I was smart enough to kind of realize that this guy was something special, and that maybe I ought to try to pursue my relationship with him. And obviously it turned out okay. Now I will tell you, I've had plenty of bad luck. I have had things that I thought were good luck and tried to pursue them and didn't work out. I have had things that were good luck and I just let it slip away, particularly when I was young. But if there's one thing that I can leave you with, whether in whatever you pursue, just please keep in mind that you're going to have good luck and you're going to have a bad luck. And when good luck comes along, take advantage of it. Just do your best, and things will work out just fine. So with that, I am happy to talk about anything you guys want to talk about. So Leo, you got any questions?
Yeah, for sure. Let me just share my screen real quick. Thank you. That was really insightful, and I think we all learned a lot. So here, let me know if you can't see that. So
I can see.
Okay. So if you all have any questions, please privately chat me and indicate whether you'd like them to be asked live or have them asked anonymously. We have a couple of questions that members submitted beforehand. So we'll start off with how did you discover your strengths, and how did that translate to your advice for students as we advance in our educations and careers?
Well, I said everybody has good luck, everybody has bad luck. Everybody also has strengths, and everybody else also has weaknesses. And I think probably that's a very good question. And I think that the way that I probably learned my strengths and my weaknesses was experience, trial and error, doing things and seeing that some things worked out and some things didn't work out. And some things I was good at and some things that I was less good at, as we were talking with Leo and Elizabeth before you guys all joined. I was telling the story about how when I would give a speech in Quebec, where French was the native language, and I would stumble through a paragraph or two, and then at the end, I would always say the same thing, that I took French in college, but I also took calculus in college, and I remember them equally well. The fact of the matter is, I wasn't very good at French, and I wasn't very good at calculus. But there were some other things that I was good at. And one of the things that is important is not to mix up substantive knowledge about a topic and skills. I might not have been so great at calculus, but I was pretty good at political science and politics. But the real skill that I realized somewhere along the line that I had was the ability to interact with people, to lead people. I've had a very diverse career. I was a lawyer, I was a government official, I was a diplomat, now I'm a banker. But it was that skill, that ability to interact with people, to make them feel comfortable, to try to encourage them to do the things that I thought that they should do, to be honest with them. Those were kind of the critical skill set that I've taken advantage of. And, there are people, for example, at my bank who know infinitely more about how to price a high yield debt offering than I do. And that's not what I do. But reaching out to clients and potential clients and customers and being able to bring them in and being able to create relationships of trust and confidence is something that I think, with all due modesty, and this is probably not a question that calls for that, but I'm pretty good at that. And so it's trial and error, and then taking advantage of your strengths, and then either trying to overcome your weaknesses, which sometimes are not so easy. I never would be good at calculus, no matter how hard I worked. But if I needed somebody who was a mathematician, to get mathematicians around me who could help me, and never to be worried that there would be people who worked with me who were smarter than me, because we all basked in each other's reflected glory. I don't know if that answers it, but that's my thought.
For sure. Thank you. And then kind of relating to that, what's been the greatest challenge that you faced in your career as ambassador and,
I think, and again, this is probably more personal than you want, but I am, as I said earlier, I'm good at reaching out to people. I'm good at going into a meeting and trying to take control of the conversation and the direction and the narrative, and in a lot of other contexts to do that. But I am not comfortable in doing it. The fact of the matter is, quite frankly, I'm very shy. And if left to my own devices, probably would be happier sitting in a room quietly and reading a book or something. But one of the things that I realized early on, and actually I had a teacher, a law school professor, who said this, and he was talking about basically the same personality trait. And he said, look, I have to get up here and I have to entertain. And it's not my nature, but I got to do it if I'm going to be a good law school professor. And if you're going to be a good lawyer, you got to do it. And so that was a challenge. I used to get very nervous when I would speak. And I just forced myself, and I put myself in sometimes difficult situations, understanding that they would be difficult. And the more you do it, the better you get. So that was a big one. I think there are probably others, but that's a big one.
And then kind of looking at the theme of like learning through opportunity, was there anything that you had not expected to learn from your time as the U.S. ambassador to Canada and working with the Obama administration that ended up being really meaningful?
This one I could probably go on for 2.5 hours, but again, let me tell you a story that I think illustrates this point. When I got to Canada, first of all, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. But one of the very early things, the first week I was there that I did is, and just stepping back, you have to understand that 70% of Canada's exports go to the United States. It has this enormous economic relationship. It's big for both countries, but it's enormous for Canada. They only border on one country. So the United States ambassador plays a very important role in Canada. It wasn't about me, but it was about the relationship. And so I get there, and one of the first things that I did was I took a tour of the Canadian Parliament building. We were in Ottawa, that's where we lived. It's the Canadian capital, and Parliament building is there. And I don't know if any of you have ever been there or seen it, but it's this beautiful Gothic structure. It's really, it's big, it's beautiful. It's very different from the American Capitol, but equally beautiful. And unlike most tours, I had 2 tour guides, the Speaker of the House and the Speaker of the Senate. And it was a big deal that I was there, and I had an entourage, and there were press, and there were TV cameras following us around everywhere we went. And we go through the whole building, and the last place we went was to the Senate chamber. And we're walking out of the Senate chamber, and there is a lobby outside of the Senate chamber, and there are huge, probably, I don't know, 12-foot by 8-foot portraits of people, British sovereigns. Canada still has, the Queen of England is also the Queen of Canada. And the one that was staring me right in the face as I walked out the door was a portrait of King George III. And I turned to my hosts and I said, gee, I guess this guy's a little more popular in your country than he was back in my country. And everybody thought I was a regular riot, and they all laughed, and I thought I was being really cute. And as I thought about that moment, that really became kind of a turning point for me in Canada. That while Canadians kind of look and act and more or less talk like Americans, and it's clearly the country that is the most like the United States, that it is different. They have a different historical experience. They have a different cultural experience. And those things are really, really important. You know, our country was born in a revolution to throw that guy out and to make sure that neither he nor anyone like him ever came back. Whereas in their country, it was a much more gradual process. And they have a system that looks much more like the British system. And they still have a queen in Queen Elizabeth. And those things were important in not just at the sort of the detail level, but at the conceptual level of the fact that Canada was different from the United States. And don't ever assume that just because something would fly in Chicago means that it would fly in Toronto, for example. That I was always very cognizant of not just that difference, but that led me to focus very much on all of the cultural differences and the historical differences. And I think, you know, it's true in everything you do, but particularly for those of you who at some point in your career are going to live or work or do something overseas And in some places it will be more obvious than it was in Canada, but always try to understand the history and the culture of the place that you're going to, and don't fight it. You know, there will be things, if you go to Russia, there are things you're not going to like. But understand it. Try to understand where they're coming from, and even if you don't agree with it, to acknowledge it. To, you know, hey, I understand where you're coming from. You know, we've got a different historical experience, but for us, this is what we think, and this is why. And so, I think the not just that one story, but the ability to understand that there were really fundamental differences and to celebrate those differences and not fight them was something that I didn't really expect. I probably should have. I mean, I'd been to Canada many times before. I traveled around the world a lot, but I had never lived in a foreign country, and I certainly had never been involved with high-level government officials in foreign countries to the level that I was for 4 years in Canada.
For sure. So then you mentioned earlier that you know, being the vice chair at the BMO Financial Group was kind of the perfect role for you. So how did your experience serving as the U.S. ambassador to Canada impact and shape your work now as the vice chair of the BMO Financial Group?
When I started at the bank, actually, I had gotten a job, and I was going to take actually 2 months off. My wife and I drove around the United States. We had been out of the country for the most part for 4 years, and we thought it would be a fun thing to do, and it was. But just before we went on that trip, I had dinner with the CEO of the BMO Financial Group, the parent company. And one of the things he said to me was, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You know, you've got to figure out what your role is and how you can be helpful to the institution. And again, this is kind of going back to, you know, a skill set and realizing what your skill set is. But I didn't try to make myself know more about high yield debt offerings than the people who had been doing it for 20 years. I let them do it. But what I was able to do, both because of people I knew in Canada and in the United States, all over both countries, people who were successful, and my ability for people I didn't know, but who people in the bank thought I would be helpful with, to create this relationship of trust and confidence that I talked about earlier, that I realized that was my value. You know, that was how I was going to create value at the bank. And yeah, I oftentimes demean my banking knowledge, and I certainly know more than I knew way back when I started. But and you know, I'm not quite as dumb as I look. But my strength was something else, and so I tried to use that strength to develop client relationships, to speak sometimes about things that related to the bank, but more often than not about something else, about U.S. politics, about the relationship between our two countries, about changes at the border, whatever it was, things that I knew about. And just the fact that the guy who was the vice chairman of the Bank of Montreal seems like, you know, he's not an idiot. That helps. And, you know, people would call me, gee, that was really interesting. You know, next time you're in Cleveland, could you drop by, or whatever it may be. And that is how it is using, to some extent, the relationships, but that only lasts for a while. But the skill set that I developed first as a lawyer, then in the White House, and then in Canada, to create value for the institution.
Yes, so I suppose And you kind of went over this question in your presentation. So we like to ask all of the people who present this question, just because I think we're all pretty avid readers. What is your favorite book?
I will tell you two, one of which has 4 volumes, soon to be a 5th. My favorite book historically, like from when I was your age, was Theodore White's book, The Making of the President, 1960. And I don't know how many of you have read that, but and it's an old book now, and it was about John Kennedy's presidential campaign. And it was the book that invented political journalism kind of as we know it today. He wrote a book that made a political campaign incredibly exciting and dynamic and dramatic, and wrote about the people in it. I oftentimes go back and reread the first chapter, and very relevant to what we saw over the last few months about how power transfers silently in the night on election night, and when it actually moves from one person to the other person. And didn't exactly work that way this time, but every other time it has. But it's a great book. It's a great book. The other is Robert Carro's biography of Lyndon Johnson, which, as I said, there were 4 volumes already. Each, the average is about 1,000 pages of each. And his 5th volume, which is about Vietnam, will hopefully come out relatively soon. He's 85 years old, and everybody wants to make sure he stays healthy. But if you're interested in politics, and it's the best book I've ever read, and what great biographies, even really good ones, oftentimes suffer from a particular deficiency, and that is that the author falls in love with his subject. And it's understandable. Spends 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 years reading everything the person wrote and everybody he ever knew, and going to libraries and doing all this stuff. And for the most part, the author just falls in love with his subject. Carro, and he's written one other book, which he also won the Pulitzer Prize for. He's won, I think, 2 Pulitzers, and he may have won the Nobel Prize. But Carro did not fall in love with Lyndon Johnson. He was very honest about his strengths and very honest about his weaknesses. And it's not really a biography of Lyndon Johnson. It is a series of books about the history of the United States in the 20th century through the eyes of Lyndon Johnson. And there are all these other characters who Sam Rayburn and Richard Russell and the former governor of Texas and John Conway and on and on and on, who play an enormous part in these books. The thing people oftentimes talk about is the first, 75 or 100 pages of the first book, which is about Johnson's childhood, where basically Lyndon Johnson is not mentioned. It talks about the hill country of Texas. It talks about the soil. It talks about how it was settled. It talks about water. It talks about the hardships that people had there. It talks about his family. And it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. So, I do read a lot. I also read junk. I'm very big on police mysteries. But those are, for the record, those are 2 very acceptable books that I can tell you about that are superb.
Yeah, those sound really interesting, and I think I hope everyone took notes on that.
If you're going to read the Carro books, I mean, they're enormous, and you don't have to read them in order. Don't have to read them all. But if you're going to pick one, the third volume, which is called Master of the Senate, which is about how Johnson became the majority leader and took a job that no one else wanted and came to dominate the Senate and make it work for the first time in generations, I think there's a consensus. It's the best one. So start there. I didn't read them in order. I read 4, then I read 3, then I read 1, then I read 2. And I'm sitting around waiting for 5.
All right. Yeah. So I can remember book 3. So we have a question. We'll move on to the unmoderated section of the Q&A. So just a reminder, if you have a question, please privately chat me and let me know if you'd like it to be asked with your name anonymously, or if you'd like to ask it yourself. We have a question from Jimmy Johnston, and he asks, what policies in relation to economics did you participate in during your time as an ambassador?
As Leo said in the intro, the trading relationship, goods and services back and forth across the border between the United States and Canada was at the time, since been passed up by China, and Mexico's come close, was the largest, not only in the world, but the largest that there ever was. And there were all kinds of issues, of some of them just physically moving goods back and forth across the border in an expeditious way. Some of them because Canadian interests and American interests were not always the same, that I had to work on. Let me give you 2 examples. On the physical movement of goods, a huge interrelated supply chain, things that were made across it, back and forth across the border, is cars. And the average automobile that is manufactured by the US automakers moved back and forth across the US-Canada border 7 times. They'd make the engine in one place and they'd put it on someplace else, and they made the tires, and back and forth and back and forth. In the old days, pick Ford, I could pick any of them, but Ford would have 30 days worth of parts sitting around in its factory, and they would take them out and they would get some more. But it wasn't critical exactly when the parts got there, because they had 30 days worth of them. The Japanese remade the auto industry. And one of the things that they did was called just-in-time delivery. The idea that if you have billions of dollars worth of parts sitting around, that is an enormous expense for the car company. And if they get them as they need them, they don't have that enormous expense. And so the time for delivery started at 30 days. They had 30 days supply. Then they got it down to 1 day of supply. And then they got it down to 1 hour of supply. Well, if these things are moving back and forth across the border at a high velocity, and there's a traffic jam, and understand, between Canada and the United States, most of, or many of the crossings, and certainly the crossings where they made the cars, are across water. And so there are bridges, and there's customs, and there is immigration, and there are lines of trucks, and there's stuff. And so you have to figure out a way to reduce the friction, the economic friction of moving across the border. And I spent a lot of time on that. That's this beyond the border notion, the idea that the border is the worst place to make decisions about whether or not people or goods should come in. I don't know if any of you have global entry, or between Canada and the United States, it's called Nexus. But the decision about, they get a little bit of information about you so that they know that, yeah, you're probably okay. It doesn't mean you'll never get stopped, but you move through much more quickly, and you do it on a touch screen, and you don't have to talk to anybody. And that's great because the decisions are made out away from the border. And it does two things. It makes it easier for me to go across the border, and it makes it safer for everybody else because they're not wasting time talking to me and my grandmother. And so that was a big thing. How do you expedite the movement of people and goods across the border to bring the two economies together and make the process more efficient? The other thing, what was the other? I had one was movement of goods. Well, for whatever it's worth, I'll tell you another one that was related to that, and that is regulatory cooperation. Because I'm pathetic, every morning I have the same thing for breakfast: Cheerios. Don't ask me why, but I do. And when I live in the United States, I eat Cheerios that are manufactured in accordance with some requirements of the Food and Drug Administration. They're US Cheerios. When I eat Cheerios, when I was in Canada, I eat different Cheerios. They kind of taste the same and look the same, but there are some things that are in US Cheerios that are not in Canadian Cheerios, and vice versa. And that's kind of stupid. I doubt that when Canadians are in the United States that they get a bowl of Cheerios and they go, oh man, I'm risking my life eating these American Cheerios. And I certainly did not feel that way when I was in Canada. Same is true of seatbelts. The same is true of all kinds of things. And so what we did was we set up a cooperation council. And this is an enormous process, and it will never be perfect, but where we tried to eliminate the dumb things that didn't make any difference. And most importantly, we tried to set up a procedure where when there is to be a new regulation, that one of the things that the regulators have to do is look to see if there is a similar regulation in Canada. And if so, can they just adopt it, and vice versa, so that you get fewer of these little things. I'll give you another of my favorites. And again, some of these may be out of date. They may have fixed them. I don't know. But in the United States, baby food is sold in 2-ounce jars. The reason is that, I guess, that's how much babies eat. In Canada, by law, by regulation, that baby food can only be sold in 4.5-ounce jars. Why? It's protecting a business in Canada, but that's not a good reason. And that nobody in Canada is going to make baby food that is in 2-ounce jars. They can't. And nobody in the United States is going to make 4.5-ounce jars because the cost of retooling the line and all the things that they need to do just don't make sense. And so it would make a whole lot more sense if, in this instance, the Canadians said, well, everywhere in the world it's 2 ounces. There's no reason for it to be 4.5 ounces in Canada. And so I spent a lot of time on things like that. It's not all of it is geopolitics and terrorism and hanging around with presidents and prime ministers. A lot of it is just nuts and bolts stuff.
For sure. So I think Olivia Ruffalo had a question. Olivia, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Leo. So my question is kind of along a little bit of simpler lines, but it kind of goes back to
Good, I'll be able to answer that one.
just talking about like good and bad luck, and kind of what are your recommendations for dealing with or moving on from like instances of bad luck that we're all ought to experience at some point in our lives?
Well, okay, there are kind of two levels to that. I suppose there's the psychological level, and I got enough problems dealing with my own problems without probably giving you advice. But there's an important point, and I probably should have said this earlier, and I'm glad you asked that question. That one of the things that's important is having lots of good and bad luck. lots of opportunities, lots of things that happen to you, lots of interactions that you have with people, lots of people that you get to know and meet. And that one of the things that I would really, and this is both true in overcoming bad things, that you can move on, obviously better than agonizing over something. But it will create more opportunities for good luck, is do things, join things, go, expand your network of friends. The more people you know, the more people you interact with, the more opportunities will present themselves to you. And that is just plain true. And so join clubs, join things. As I said earlier, I got very involved in political things. Actually, my story of the guy who I met, who introduced me to Barack Obama way back when, I was doing something for the mayor of Chicago. And I don't know if you guys are old enough, they still have one or two on the street, but they had this thing, Cows on Parade. And they had the cows all over the Michigan Avenue and elsewhere, and they've since had lots of other things like that. But after the cows one, which was hugely successful, the city decided that they were going to set up ping pong tables all over the city and have people play ping pong whenever they wanted to. And this guy who I know, who actually has a very substantial business, but one of the things that he owns is the company that makes the sort of championship ping pong tables. And he sponsors, as he will tell you, table tennis team. And so he was the guy who, he came to the city with this idea, and he was doing it. And I was asked if I could help him out. I had done something kind of like that, not ping pong, but I had helped the mayor with something else. And we became friends. Well, I promise you, when the mayor told me about ping pong, which I kind of rolled my eyes at, but when the mayor told me about ping pong, it was not on my radar that this was going to get me a job as the U.S. ambassador to Canada. And believe me, I met a lot of people who didn't, who didn't present me with those kinds of opportunities. But the more opportunities more places that you place yourselves, the more opportunities you're going to have, both for good things and to move on for bad things. I don't know if that answers.
Yes, thank you.
It's a very good question.
Thank you.
And then Cole had a question. Cole, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Cole. I'm a junior in Chicago. My question is a little bit related to the last one. I just wanted to ask, do you have any advice for teenagers working toward accessing these opportunities and more opportunities, and connecting with others, especially at times like these when everything is remote?
Yeah. Well, if I had the solution to how to deal with COVID, I'd probably, Bill Gates and I would be buying islands together or something. But leave aside the COVID moment, because I know it's been a big chunk of your lives because you're younger, but it's going to pass. Okay. My guess is, maybe it will be the end of this year sometime, and it won't go back to exactly the way things were before, but people are going to be interacting on a more regular basis. But whether it's in person, or the fact of the matter is these things, I will tell you honestly, first of all, I'm in Florida at the moment. Okay, we have a home in Florida. And I've been here for the last 2 months, partly because I can do these things from my home in Florida just as easily as I can do them from my home in Chicago. And that will last. And probably if Leo had said to me when I was going to be in Florida, hey, would you get on a plane and fly to Chicago and meet with some of my friends, I probably would have taken a pass, but this is much easier. So some things are not going to change. But kind of going back to what I said earlier, just get involved in things. Get involved in things that interest you. What the fact, and I sort of congratulated you all here at the beginning for doing this on a Saturday. And this is an example of you are people who obviously are motivated to do stuff. And I'm not going to tell you what to do, because what's good for me is not necessarily good for you, but it doesn't matter how old you are or what your interests are. There are things that you can get plugged into that you are interested in. And if you do a good job, if you take advantage of the opportunity when it presents itself, things will work out. So that'd be my advice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we all wish we were in Florida at the moment.
Yes, no, I do understand. My wife is taking my daughter back to the airport right now, going back to Chicago, and she's not looking forward to it.
All right, so I think Krish Malhotra had a question. Go ahead.
Yes.
I can't hold this.
It's not that heavy. Thank you for being here. I was wondering, in the past like 15 years or so, I think we've all witnessed a large rise of cryptocurrency around the world. And as someone,
Chris, could you? I'm having a little trouble hearing you. If you could either get closer or talk more slowly.
sorry about that. Is it a bit better now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for being here, first of all. In the past 15 years or so, I think we've all witnessed a large rise of cryptocurrency around the world. And as someone that's in finance and the vice chair of BMO Financial Group, I want to know your view on cryptocurrency and things like Bitcoin.
I think that the technology that underpins cryptocurrency has a real future. I think that cryptocurrency that is not regulated by governments that we have confidence in, particularly the United States, is a big problem. And it's a big problem because, first of all, the value of it just fluctuates wildly because there isn't that much of it. And there's a lot by, the standards of what I have in my pocket. But by the standards of the money supply in the United States, or for that matter, the money supply in the Sudan, it may match that, but it's just, there's not that much. And so, Elon Musk says he bought $1 billion worth of cryptocurrency, and then says you can spend it on Teslas, and all of a sudden the value rockets. And then the other problem is, first of all, there is, some of it has disappeared, and it's impossible to track down where it's disappeared to, and it is used extensively by international criminal enterprises and others to buy things that they shouldn't be able to buy. And so I don't believe that the Bitcoins of this world, and there are a plethora of them now, but I don't believe that they are going to be a long-term solution. But it does reduce friction in the economy. It is cheaper to move money from, and faster, to move money from the United States to the UK using Bitcoin than it is to use SWIFT, the international financial system, for doing this. The problem is that maybe some of the money that's moving from place to place shouldn't be moving from place to place, that we wouldn't want it to move from place to place, that it's being used for some nefarious purpose. And one of the tools that governments have to deal with that is the fact that there's transparency in the financial systems that we have. So the answer, and I'm not an expert on this, but the answer in my mind is that these sort of unregulated, just sort of crazy cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin perhaps a little bit more stable than some, is not the long-term solution here.
For sure. So I think we're about out of time. So we'll ask one more question. This will be the final question.
Okay.
Alp, do you want to go ahead? You said you had something.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. And thank you, Mr. Jacobson, just for setting aside your time for today and kind of taking our questions. Mine is, when you face good luck, like how did you adapt to make the most out of the opportunity and like kind of make it as effective as possible?
Well, first of all, before I answer that question, which I will, I want to thank all of you and congratulate you again on what you're doing. And, you know, after this, you can go do whatever you want, and probably some of you will go see what's going on with respect to the impeachment, which I know I will. I'm sorry, having done that now, and I didn't make a note. Elf, what just give me 2 words of your question.
I was just wondering, like, how you adapted to make the most out of good luck.
Okay. Again, I'm probably better at telling stories than I am at giving lectures. But when we got to Canada, and the same was true when I was in the White House, and the same was true when I worked for President Obama, his campaign, and lots of other years as a lawyer. But when we got to Canada, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Hello, Dolly, but there's a scene in it where she shows up at this restaurant, and she's this grand dame, and she shows up at this very elaborate restaurant, and all the waiters and all the staff and the maitre d's all sing these songs to her and fall all over themselves. And when we got to Canada, it was like Hello, Dolly. Okay, we understand. I live in a very nice place, but it's not. You know, if you came to our apartment in Chicago, I doubt you'd say, "Oh my God." And at the time, we lived in a house in the suburbs, which was very nice, but it wasn't grand in any way. And we get there, and we're in a house on 12 acres. Had, I believe, 32 rooms. It was in the most choice place. It was like 200 acres that he had, and over the years they sold off pieces, but there were still 12 acres. And the place is just gorgeous. And there were, flowers everywhere and all this stuff. It was in October. And the staff, I don't know, maybe Downton Abbey is another example of this. They all show up at Downton Abbey, and the staff all lines up and introduces themselves. And that's what it was. There were 7 people who worked in the house. There were lots more people, security people, gardeners, and others who worked outside the house. When we get there, our suitcases are in the back of the car, the government car that picked us up. We go to, kind of get them out of the trunk, and they look at us like we're crazy. Some of the staff, the house staff, takes stuff out, and there were 2 cooks, and what would you like to eat, even though it was 11 o'clock at night. And they made us some things, and they had wine, and they had all this stuff. And by the time we get up to our bedroom, all of our clothes have been unpacked and put in dressers. It was crazy. Okay, it was crazy. And I'm not telling you this about, boy, wasn't that great, but it was crazy. And that I remember sitting there with my wife in this quite grand bedroom that we had, and saying to her, if nothing ever goes right for us in the rest of our lives, we're ahead of the game. And I think part of the answer to your question is just to understand when good things happen. Now, probably that one's kind of an obvious example of good thing. But do you meet someone who impresses you as quite able? One of the things when I was a lawyer that I used to tell young lawyers is those young lawyers or others at the businesses that we represented, and it was a big corporate law firm. One of these days, they're going to be the senior lawyers there, or they're going to be the senior business folks there. And cultivate those relationships. Try to find people who you like, who like you, and who seem able. And that is true in everything you do. I will tell you, I am sort of obsessive about when I meet somebody, you know, you had a card, or can you give me your contact information? And I put it in and I make myself lists. Giving away the store here, but I have lists by city of people who, like, if I go to Boston, who are the people I should look up while I'm there? Now, they may be busy. I may not talk to them while I'm there, but the fact that I reached out and I said, hey, I'm going to be there in 2 weeks. You got time for drinks or dinner or something, is a connection point. And the more that you are top of mind for people who are able and themselves entrepreneurial and interesting, the more successful and the more interesting your life will be. So meet people, follow up when you meet people, don't forget them. If you're not good at remembering names like me, write them down. But do as much outreach as you can, and it'll turn out some people don't want to see you, and some people don't like you, and some people who you met, who you thought were great, turn out not to be. But the more people you meet, the more people you talk to, the more you follow up, the more sensitive you will be to what's going to be useful to you and what's not.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Your stories are fascinating. So I think we're about out of time, so I'll pass it off to Lizzie with some concluding thoughts.
Thank you, Leo, and thank you, Mr. Jacobson, so much for taking time out of your Saturday. You obviously have a wealth of experience in everything from law and politics to finance, and we really enjoyed hearing all of your stories and also getting your book recommendations as well. So I'm sure many of us will look into that. We all learned, I think, just as a key takeaway from this, it's just important to get as many experiences and meet as many people as possible so that you can maximize your luck and kind of take advantage of all of the opportunities that are around you. And so with that said, we have 2 upcoming events in the next couple of weeks. So we have Navigating Internships in College with the Wharton Undergraduate Finance Group next Saturday, and we also have a stock pitching workshop with Morningstar. So we hope you guys take advantage of that, and I believe either Leo's set a survey, a post-event survey in the chat, or you should be receiving it in your email. But we really appreciate all of you guys attending today as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks to all of you. I enjoyed it.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you again.